In the last century, or maybe last 2 centuries, there were some movements in Islamic history, movements of reforms, reformist movements. And they adopted 2 different, or you can say opposite directions. One reformist movement, without mentioning the names, but they emerged in various parts of the world, Arab and non-Arab world. One part. One reformist movement started thinking in a way in this new present world, or the modern world, we need to go back to the pure Islam. To practice the pure Islam as it existed in the time of Holy Prophet and the time of companions. So they became Puritans. They have the same status as in the history, as the Protestants have in the history of Christianity. They became the Puritans. From Puritans, the new trend emerged which finally concluded in the form of extremism. The Puritanism converted into extremism. So Puritanism and extremism, they disconnected the real spirit of the message of Islam from the traditional Islam. Because by saying that we want to go to the pure origin of Islam, it means you want to deny the significance of 14 centuries of Islamic tradition. This is the Puritanism mean. You want to deny the whole historical tradition. You want to deny all the authorities of all the possessors of the knowledge, the Aimma of fiqh, the Aimma of tafsir, the Aimma of hadith, the Aimma of tasawwuf, the Aimma of marifa, the Aimma of history, the Aimma of philosophy. Those who have been carrying on and transforming the message of Islam from generations to generations, and those who formulated the basic principles of interpretation, and those who provided the discipline to interpretation of Islam, so that any new interpreter of Islam, any new explainer of Islam would be able to remain within specific outline which are based on the basic principles of Quran and Sunnah. So it means when you say Puritan Islam, it means you are denying the history of traditional Islam consisting of 14 centuries. And this is against the teachings of Holy Prophet himself. This thought led some people towards extremism. This was a very conservative view. And this is not traditional Islam. Rather, this is negation of traditional Islam. Other reformist movement came up and emerged in this time, and they thought the Islam has not become that much practical and workable as it used to be in the ancient times. So we should reform it to make it adaptable. They didn't want to adopt Islam. They want Islam to adapt. They didn't want to change themselves. They wanted Islam to be changed. So these reformists, they started the secularist movements. This was the origin of modernism, which they picked up from the Western world's necessity. There was a necessity, because the original words and letters of the prophets and messengers were not intact. The scriptures were changed. And the works which were done in Islamic history for the disciplines and sciences, these kinds of works were never done by the scholars of other people. There was a very big vacuum. And that vacuum was being filled by an arbitrary authority of a single person of a church. Arbitrary authority, because there was a vacuum. When we come to the case of Islam, there was never a vacuum. There was no arbitrary authority in order to fulfill any vacuum. So there was never a challenge between the modern and the ancient. Rather, there was continuity. So when this new reformist movement started with modernism, so modernism leads to 2 attitudes or 2 philosophies. One is modernism. One leads to secularism and one liberalism. One secularism and one liberalism. What is secularism? Which originates from modernism. This is reductionism. Secularism is nothing but reductionism. You may think, what is reductionism? So reductionism means to reduce the role of Islam just only up to the extent of single dimension out of the hundreds dimensions of Islam. To reduce Islam just up to the dimension of worship, very narrow dimension of religion, religious acts of observance. So this is reductionism, and taking out all of the spheres of life from individual level up to the global level out of the ambit of Islam. So this is reducing Islam to a very narrow scope. This was the second damage. And the second thing which emerged out of modernism was liberalism. And what is liberalism? To me, it is agnosticism and skepticism. Liberalism means you are nowhere, neither here nor here. You are hanging between two ends. Whatever you hear from CNN, from BBC, from Time, from Western news, from Western European culture, from the Western culture, from the Eastern culture, from this scholar, from this country, from that country, from the Indian movement, from the Arab movement, whatever you hear from various parts of the world, you are waving here, neither here nor there. You are always in the condition of doubt, skepticism and agnosticism. You know nothing. So there is total, your whole area of knowledge is full of probability. There is lack of definite knowledge. And definite knowledge just comes out of the revelation from the mouth of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of Quran and Sunnah. So that's why I mentioned that when the reformist movement of Puritans started, it ended to extremism. And the extremistic interpretation of Islam led some younger generations mistakenly towards radicalism and terrorism. And when the other reformist movement started, negation of the workability and practicability of Islam in the modern world, they led through modernism the people towards either to secularism or to absolute liberalism.